Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Death Note Part 1, Episode 15, Wager. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief recap of what happens within this episode. So the episode picks up in Light's room, still with Misa. He gets her spare phone, one of her spare phones that she's gotten through various jobs so that they can keep in contact unmonitored by the police. She's still very enthusiastic about spending a lot of time with him, being lovers, doesn't seem to comprehend that they are under police scrutiny, especially him, that he is a prime suspect already. And in the end, because she's not listening to him, he ends up kissing her to shut her up. And this leads her to basically leaving in a bit of a daze. And then we kind of cut to him musing on his future plans and how he's going to use Rem and Misa to kill L, but trying to decide, does he want to kill L tomorrow or wait a little bit? And we get a scene kind of where he's in his mind's eye standing on top of a building as he muses with his red hair and eyes. We then kind of zoom out to where we see L with his blue hair and eyes standing on what seems more like a radio tower of sorts, with like little flashing lights at the top of the very thin building or tower. And then we see him basically going over different pieces of holding up little baggies with different various clues, little what looks like chunks of like dirt and such, and strands of hair. And he's basically talking about how the second Kira messed up. They left some evidence within the tapes that they sent, and then tells Sorichiro that if he dies in the next couple of days, to assume that Light is Kira, as Kira would be the only one who would know who he is, and Light's the only one outside of the task force that knows his identity. And he admits that he may not be thinking entirely clearly because of the present danger, and he might just be thinking that Light is Kira because he's the only option so far. But either way, if he dies soon, they are to assume that Light is Kira. We then arrive at the next day at school, where Light is talking to his actual chosen girlfriend. When he happens to see Elle, he leaves her, goes to speak to Elle, who basically tells him that he's told the task force to assume Light is Kira if he dies in the next few days. We then have Misa running up to them and being super excited to see Light. Elle tells him he's jealous. A crowd gathers because Misa is famous. Misa then complains about someone touching her bottom, turns around, sees Elle there. Elle then basically runs over to where Light is, feigning outrage. And Misa then leaves, but she will have seen Elle's name because now she has seen him in person. So Light makes an excuse, walks a little way down the path, and then tries to call Misa. However, the phone rings in Elle's hand. And he then basically is upset with Elle, but doesn't give anything away, decides to call her second spare phone because she had a total of 3. He had one, Elle stole one, but she should have another. However, before he can, Elle's phone rings, and he informs Light that they have arrested Misa because they had found evidence in her apartment as well as on the tapes that match, and that she is suspected of being the second Kira. And he says he doesn't know if it's good or bad news for Light because Misa obviously has introduced herself as his girlfriend. And this, of course, puts Elle into a bit of anger, but he decides that all is not lost. We then go follow Elle to where Misa has been strapped in and has like a metal blindfold, is being held upright on like a slab thing that she's tied to. And they're basically watching her. She then starts begging Rem to kill her, which Rem, of course, refuses to do. Elle, who is observing this, assumes that she's trying to kill herself, so they end up gagging her with a claw so she can't bite her own tongue, which is where that little scene ends. Then we have Rem basically arriving at Light's house and informing him that when a person gives up or forfeits their ownership of the Death Note, all memories related to the Death Note will also disappear. We then flash back to a couple hours before where Rem explains this to Misa, assures Misa that she's still going to love Light, so she's not going to lose that. And Misa basically nods her head to relinquish the Death Note, losing memory. And then Rem, before she leaves, kind of brushes against the blindfold, which ends up flicking Misa's hair, which is caught on camera by Elle, who is observing. And then we full circle back to where Rem basically tells Light that he has to save Misa or she will kill him. And he then says that he will save her. He has a plan, and that is where we cut off for this episode. Now that we've recapped what happened, it's time now to rank the episode. On this channel, we rank on two lists, our mostly objective ranking list, which is mostly objective because it doesn't include emotion, but bias and judgment can still apply, and the personal ranking, which is where the emotion applies, and also my personal opinion and preferences. So we'll start with our mostly objective rank values, and we of course start with our multi-arc supporting character development, which we have two separate pieces, and I am going to count them separately because each of them were significant. So obviously first we have Misa being arrested, which is obviously big development. If you are arrested, I'm sure it's going to be very memorable and impactful to you. And then we have the second piece, which also includes Misa, but again, I'm counting them separately at 3 points each, which is when Misa forfeits ownership of the Death Note, which again is a significant event, as she has now lost all of her memories of Light, memories of Rem, and she will no longer be able to see either Ryuk or Rem. We then have what I consider to be an impactful / memorable moment line, etc., which is basically Misa's prison setup. I feel like that's pretty memed online as being pretty memorable. And obviously it's incredibly excessive and looks kind of odd. So again, it's very memorable. And that is why I'm counting it there. Though I did debate whether it would count or not, but I'm like, if it's gone onto the internet and become memes and other such little snippets that are mentioned frequently, at that point you have to consider it impactful at the very least and memorable also. And then finally, 4 points is the world building piece, which is where we learn from Rem that if a person who owns a Death Note forfeits it, they will lose all of their memories relating to any murders they committed, the Death Note itself, the existence of Shinigami, they won't be able to see the Shinigami anymore, etc. But that some things still would remain. For example, Misa's feelings for Light will still remain because that is her human emotion and not necessarily directly related to the Death Note, as she fell in love with Light at first sight, but her love for Kira or her memory of Kira was separate, but she won't remember that Light was Kira because that was related to the Death Note, or that she was second Kira, which will of course allow her to effectively lie to the police, which they are hoping will allow her to then be released. At any rate, that then brings us to an episode of not an episode, a score of 13 out of 10, and 10 being the maximum, it will be graded a 10 out of 10 episode. Which brings us to our part 1 rankings so far, and in first we have Rebirth, Confrontation, Doubt. This episode comes in 4th, Wager. then encounter, confessions, tactics, friend, pursuit, glare, unraveling, love, dealings, assault, and overcast is currently in 15th. So now we come to my personal ranking, and it should come as a surprise to no one that this is not one of my favorite episodes because honestly, I don't like Misa as a character. So an episode that's very Misa heavy, not typically for me. That doesn't mean that there wasn't anything redeemable about it. For example, L at one point when he's watching Misa launches himself onto the couch, like full on jumps onto it, and I thought that was great. That was that was that was what was great. Honestly, though, I didn't like the kiss because obviously we know that they have no true feelings towards each other. Well, she has true feelings towards him. He has no feelings towards her other than like annoyance. And he literally kisses her for the purpose of shutting her up. That goes right over her head. But it's also kind of a shitty thing to do to manipulate someone's emotions like that. Of course, she was being dumb and not really listening to him, so he kind of had to manipulate her. Either way, it's just not a great look to be kissing people for those types of reasons, or kissing people that you don't have feelings for in general. Just did not enjoy that. Obviously, Misa once again is ruining everything. Like, just randomly showing up after he specifically told her they have to keep their distance. She just decides, oh, I'm going to show up at his school, introduce myself as his girlfriend, draw a crowd of people. And she does get to see Elle's name, but then immediately is arrested, unable to utilize the name, and then has to give up the death note, which means she also forgot Elle's name that she had just saw. So again, kind of useless, her one purpose, and she couldn't even fulfill it. Like, hello. Very annoying. Honestly, with the whole prison setup, I understand why it is that way, even though it looks a bit odd and inhumane the way that they have her strung, like kind of tied to a slab in like a raggedy um smock. I think smock's a word for it. Short dress, whatever the case may be. And with the metal blindfold, and then they gag her. Like, it's all just very excessive, but I understand why, given that Kira's powers are at least somewhat known to them and they don't specifically know how it works, so better safe than sorry. But yeah, I think she just ruins everything. Though I did like all the light and L scenes, so that also is a little bit of a positive. But honestly, not a fan. Did have significant events though, and that does count for something. It did have a lot of plot progression that's definitely moving us forward into the next stage of the game. And for those reasons, because there were those minor, tiny bits of good, I decided that this episode was worth 3 points out of 10. And that brings our part 1 ranking so far in the personal ranking to, in first place, Rebirth, Encounter, Glare, Confessions, Doubt, Pursuit, Confrontation, Tactics, Dealings, Friend, Love, Overcast. This episode, Wager, is in 13th. Then we have Unraveling and Assault in 15th place. Which brings us to our final segment, which is the series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, we have so far gathered a total score of 110 out of 260. And on the personal side, we have only gathered 87 out of a possible 260. Though I do believe some of the better episodes are still on the way. So that score will definitely rise. But this episode did not help its case because it was only a 3. And with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Death Note Part 1, Episode 15, Wager. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.